Yeah. So years ago, I had a mentor who was this, 10-time New York Times bestselling author and just like had everything that I ever dreamed that I thought that I wanted. When I shared with him some of my early writing for my first book idea, I remember he sent me an email and he's like, "Do you want feedback in person or through email?" And that was the note. And of course, I was so nervous to receive this person's feedback. The fact that I had even handed him and of course my writing style, vulnerable, raw, the fact that I really went there and shared that with him was the hugest leap. And I, of course, thought this was the beginning of everything. And so when I asked him I was too afraid to meet with him in person, which I sort of regret this. And instead I said, okay, just send me your thoughts through email. And he basically said, no one cares about your story, Amber. Your story doesn't matter unless you're a celebrity or, you've done some unimaginable feat. No one cares about your story.
Your Creative Push, episode 333, Using Your Art to Tell Your Story. What's up, everybody? Youngman Brown here, and I thought that was the perfect intro, a perfect way to set the stage for today's episode. You just heard from Amber Ray from episode 289, and we'll get back to her in a moment, but I just wanted to set the stage for you a bit. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about using your art to tell a story, to share your message. It's part of a podcast relay that I am tagged in. I was tagged by our good friends Sandra Busby and Tara Roskell of the Kickin' the Creatives podcast. And the subject that they tagged me in is using art to tell a story or to convey a message. And I definitely have a few things to say about that. And I'd like to use some of our former guests to help out because there are a few episodes that I instantly thought back to when they sent me that prompt. But to make things even more clear for you, I'm going to be tapping into the idea of using art to tell your story, your specific story. And if you don't have a story or you don't think that you have a story, why you're wrong. And hopefully this episode will help you to figure out your own story and to realize why telling it is the single most important thing that you can do as a creative person and why it will never let you down. That is something that I have come to absolutely believe in my 3 years of doing this podcast and my conversations with over 300 individuals. I think this is one of the most important episodes for sure. But first, back to Amber after her mentor told her that nobody cares about her story.
And I was so hurt and burned by that. And I took when he said, no one cares about your story, I made it mean I don't matter and I'm not good enough and my writing's not good enough. And, I just didn't even reply or engage. I became it triggered all of my insecurities about being seen, sharing my story, following, the creative path that I felt like was so true for me. And I just basically didn't write for years, 5 years. I started taking myself out of my writing. I kept getting invited to give these talks and I couldn't give them because I couldn't write a talk that was impersonal. And I kept thinking that my work was supposed to be impersonal and that I needed to not be in it. And I can look back now and and see, because I was 24 or 25 at this time, I can see that he may have, what he may have been trying to say, which was you're 24 years old, get some more life experiences before you I think he was trying to be helpful, but because I didn't get curious, because I shut down and didn't ask questions, I, took on this story and truly believe that I could never follow my dream of writing because it didn't matter. And what's interesting is that, I now, when I think about feedback, I always like to think about where the feedback is coming from because feedback is always a reflection of someone else's worldview and not necessarily you. So him telling me your story doesn't matter actually had nothing to do with me. And it just had to do with the fact of what kind of writer he was. And he's never told a vulnerable story in his life. He's the most direct, straight to the point. Here's the idea. Here are the facts. Let me just get to it. He's not a storyteller.
Right.
And so I was seeing my style through him. And yeah, that really put a wedge in my dreams for some time. But, at the same time, it also, I feel like it helped me really build resilience and also helped me understand what was my unique style, because I didn't know my style and I didn't know that was my voice. So if I would have known like, oh, well, this is my style and it just doesn't fit, then I would have maybe not taken it so personally. But then over the years, I was drawn to the Cheryl Strayeds and the Elizabeth Gilberts. And anytime someone really opened up and revealed themselves, I was like, ooh, yes. And so I started really like capturing, I called a clue journal, like writing down the elements of writing that spoke to me. And of course, I wrote down all the elements of how I wrote. And so it's like whatever we see in someone else is what we see in us. And so that like eventually gave me the confidence to begin to write that way and to lean back into that. And the book, I feel like why, to get back to your first question, one of your first questions, why the book was so hard for me is because in the back of my head, I was still telling myself that my story didn't matter.
Ah, man, raise your hand if you can relate to what Amber just talked about. This feeling of not mattering, this feeling of your story not mattering just because one person said one thing to you. And then because she thought her story didn't matter, she thought that she was supposed to be impersonal. And of course, that didn't feel right. So then she shut down and didn't put herself into her own work. And then it becomes this skeleton. You probably know this feeling, whether you felt it because somebody shut you down the way that Amber was shut down, or perhaps you just started doubting yourself. I've certainly done this. Like the feeling of who cares about my unique perspective on why my dogs bark at my doorbell, or why would anyone want to listen to my take on supernovas? Resistance is already strong in your brain when it starts out, and it only gets stronger and stronger. But there's so many other reasons why you might have abandoned your true story as well. Perhaps your audience is growing too slow, and that's affecting what you create and what you say with that creation. Or maybe it's growing too fast, which is, I guess, a good problem to have, but now you're worried about telling your story or sharing a message that appeals to everyone. Or maybe you're reading the comments or paying attention to your analytics a little bit too much. Maybe your mom just followed you on Facebook or Instagram and you're afraid of your story offending her or maybe hurting her. There's a million ways that you can get off track from telling your story, and all of them are very quick derailments. One of the other major ones is doing your creative passion as a job. There's so many examples from this podcast. I actually found too many audio clips, so I decided not to even use any. But here's how the basic story goes. You find this creative thing that you love to do, and you put so much energy into putting yourself into your creative pursuit of building up a body of work and a talent. And eventually that body of work and that talent gets to be so great that you're able to now do freelance work or commissions, or even get hired by somebody to use your skills to share their message. And all the time that you spend sharing their message brings you away from telling your own story or sharing your own messages. So many people on this podcast have shared that same story of needing to find a way to get back to their personal work, that thing that brought them to their art in the first place. So many that it's actually kind of scary. But it just goes to show you that the idea of sharing your message, not somebody else's, is the thing. That's the focal point, the guidepost that will put you on the right path. That's the thing that gave you so much energy in the first place, that you're able to use your art or your creativity to get something inside of you out or figure something out about yourself and to tell that story, even if it wasn't to thousands of people, even if it was just to yourself. Being able to do that is the thing that brought you that energy. And then when somebody else's story gets inserted in there, it's like they built a dam, and all of that creative juice, that creative water that's supposed to be flowing through you is now jammed up, and it starts to feel a little dry on the other side. And perhaps you've had this experience where you get off track, or perhaps you haven't even gotten on the right track yet. And the really shitty thing is that sometimes you don't even realize that you're off track. Sometimes you don't even realize it for years. You can't see that you're not opening up to yourself or being vulnerable or sharing your story or wondering if anybody even cares. You know, who cares that you always dreamed of being a ballerina or an astronaut or an archaeologist or a railroad conductor? Who cares that you only care about seaweed? Who cares that you secretly love disco? Who cares that you just moved to a new town? Who cares that you were molested when you were a kid? Who cares that your child died? Who wants to hear about your pain? To answer that, I'm going to defer to spoken word poet Johnny Anomaly.
And like, I wouldn't consider this a ministry at all, but one of the quotes that was kind of stuck out to me during all of that was it was a quote that said, your greatest ministry will most likely come out of your greatest hurt. And through spoken word, I mean, I've seen it. Like, there's a lot of healing involved with being able to say what I want to say. And, I know I say that a lot, but it's true, man. Like, so many people I hear throughout the years say, man, you're just saying everything I've always wanted to say, but I was never brave enough to get in front of a crowd to do it. I was never, and it's like, man, come on. Like, glossophobia is what it's called, of the fear of public speaking. Like, I recently read in an article that said people rank that over the fear of death. And so it's like the thought of bearing it all in front of an audience, like all the skeletons in the closet, you're basically just opening up and saying, hey, everyone take a look. Mm-hmm. And it's not a pretty thing sometimes, but it's honest and it's real. Sometimes the things I write, like, I don't know why I put myself through it. Like, I did a poem for an album called Whispers and Screams, and Whispers and Screams was actually about the loss of my son. And I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? Like, why am I trying to but all I can think of was somebody else has to hear this. Like, someone else, whether it's immediately or further down the road, or maybe someday 10 years from now, someone finds it, hears it somewhere. I just felt like someone needed to hear it. And for them, I felt like that's who I was doing it for. So in 2 takes, I'm like, okay, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. It's just too much for me. But after it was done, it was like, okay, it's great. It helped me out. It helped me heal in a way that I'm just so glad I was able to express myself in that way. I don't know what I would do if I wasn't able to express myself in my writing or my performance poetry or whatever. I would, oh my gosh, like, I'd probably kill someone, man. I'd probably be like, I would be a nut job, dude. Like, if I couldn't, express myself that way and
that energy out.
Yeah. That's why I say it is definitely the art of sublimation, man. It's, all that negative stuff that I've been through, man. Some marriages don't make it through that.
Lots of them don't.
Yeah. It's something that I know friends, I mean, who have been through way less, who is just, there's no way. I mean, they felt like their life was unbearable, and it's like, wow, you had it pretty good, man. You would think, but you never know what people are going through behind the scenes. And that's what I tackle in my poetry, is all the behind the scenes stuff. Like I said earlier about the skeletons in the closet, I'm more than willing to open it up and let everyone see. And if it's a great thing, man, because it's liberating for me, because I have nothing to hide. I'm pretty much a freaking open book to everything. So much so that it's like, okay, dude, you should probably keep that to yourself. But it's like, well, I was asked, man. Someone asked me and I just said it, it's whatever.
Right. So if you missed that episode with Johnny, it was one of my favorite conversations. Episode 329. You can get there, yourcreativepush.com/329. But he is also the one that I am tagging to pay this podcast relay forward. So definitely check out his podcast, the Creative Coping Podcast, to get more on his take about using art to convey a message or to tell a story. But Johnny is a great case for somebody who is sharing their story in the most raw, vulnerable way and live in front of an audience. And I'm not saying that you have to tell your story in that fashion, but whenever you're feeling scared about being vulnerable or honest or honestly sharing your story, Think about him and think about the way that he's doing it and realize that it might not be that scary. So hopefully listening to Johnny made you realize the answer to those questions that I asked before the clip. Those who cares questions and all of the future who cares questions that you might ask yourself from now on until the end of your life. Many people care. And yes, many people care about themselves first and foremost. And that's why they're going to take your story and make it their story. They're going to use your story and they're going to take a bath in it to help them get clean of whatever they're going through. And then they're going to use another aspect of your story and they're going to use it like a towel to dry off after that bath. And then they're going to use another part of your story and they're going to use that as a bathrobe to relax after they've gone through all of their shit through your shit. And that's not to say that your story always has to be a shitty one, but they're only able to get to that point if you really truly shared your story. If you got to the heart of what mattered to you, or at least you tried to figure it out for yourself. Because that's the glory of sharing your story. It doesn't have to be a story. It simply has to be what's going on inside of you, as concrete or confusing as it may be to you. More on this from Adana Care, who creates large-scale pencil drawings of animals.
I would say the last maybe 10, 12 years of my career, as my artwork has progressed, the animals serve as symbols to tell the story. So they're not animals anymore that I just enjoy drawing. They carry with them kind of a lineage of being drawn so many times that they now have their own meaning. And certain animals and doing certain things now represent certain events, loss, love, connection, family, certain people, certain events. Now they carry in them in more value. I can read them like a diary. I would be able to read a large mural of mine and be able to know what was going on, who I was talking about, what was happening in the world, how I felt about something by looking at my drawings.
That's really interesting because I have written down here a question that I wanted to ask. Well, a two-part question really, but the question I wrote was, do you find that all of your art can be pinpointed to one particular point in your life? And that's pretty much what you just said.
Yeah.
But one in particular that I wanted to ask you about was the Screaming Bear. I was wondering if you could tell us kind of that story.
Yeah, the Screaming Bear is a drawing that will always be is my personal drawing. The Screaming Bear was started before my dad passed and was finished after he passed away. The story of my dad passing away was very unexpected. We were actually working at my studio repairing the door, and he had mentioned, he wasn't feeling well. He had a really bad headache. And so, I told him, go home. I had his toolbox in my house and all that. Didn't think much of it. He went to the doctor and they discovered he had a brain tumor. And so things kind of spiraled out of control after that. And I had started this drawing. Originally it was the Screaming Bear part of it.
Mm-hmm.
When they told me he had the brain tumor, that's a pretty scary thing to hear, and where it was located and all of that. But we were looking for treatment options and all of that, and he was in the hospital being treated, and they decided they needed to remove the tumor pretty quickly because it was causing significant amount of complications at that point. And he didn't survive the surgery. And so we're talking under 2-week time frame here that this happened. So the days where I wasn't at the hospital, I would come to the studio and just kind of sketch out this bear. And originally it was just this idea of hearing the words brain tumor, so it was a screaming bear, kind of like that feeling that you get when you hear something and you just don't want to hear it, and then once you hear it, you just want to not hear it.
Yeah, scream and then go hibernate or something.
Yeah, and then the morning that I was called that he was officially brain dead, I was working on the drawing. And I remember the spot on the drawing when I was on the phone that I was. So it's a very, it's a almost minute by minute play of what happened when my dad passed away. And so after my dad passed, I worked on it for several months to complete it. And it obviously changed from the original idea of it to what it is now. And I don't know if you have visuals attached or anything, but it's basically a giant grizzly bear. This is almost 9 feet tall drawing, and its head is cut open and stitched where my dad's head was. They had to remove the whole, basically from where the ear starts all the way, like an arc, all over where the forehead is, all the way to the other ear. So I don't know. It's pretty, to imagine that whole front area to be removed off. So in my grizzly, it's kind of like pulled back tight, like it's being placed back where it should have been. And the butterflies and bees, out of the mouth just kind of represent the sweet things, but like how hard it stings. I'm sorry.
You're okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for opening up and talking about it. I know that it's hard, and we appreciate that. I agree that, I remember the exact point in my life where I was at when writing a particular piece, my exact life situation and what was going on and what I was feeling, etc. But what does that do for you, and what does it do for somebody to be able to have that kind of, sidekick along with you, and having your art be like a personal journal or diary that you can look back upon to kind of see this timeline of not just your art, but, of your life? What does that do for you personally?
Well, for me, it's really kind of an interesting feeling, because when I throw these drawings out there, not like I throw them out there, but when I put these drawings out there, I just throw them around. When I hang these drawings up for people to see, it's such almost a release that I'm like, there's so much personal information and fear and love in these drawings that I go, how lucky am I that I get to show people all of these really personal things, but I don't have to give them everything.
Right.
But creating it was my therapy, was my friend, and is my diary. It's all these things. It's every single one of my drawings from when I first started doing this to now have been basically one continuous drawing. They all just piggyback off the other. They're all just a story of life, just documented with these symbols that I can read. And a lot of my family knows now what a lot of these things are. And so you see like my daughter go, oh, you know what that is, or even my mom and my sister and people that have been around me for a long time, they don't even question it anymore. They just go, oh, okay, I think I know what that's about. Or
interesting.
And what's really exciting about other people seeing them is allowing them to give them meaning, their own meaning. And to maybe with the screaming bear, you can feel the sadness and kind of the danger and this kind of the way that the bear's standing and they're on this cliff and everything's going off the cliff, and feel that kind of angst. But maybe they're able to put their own personal experience in that and get something from that and get what they need from that, or be able to relate to that somehow in their lives.
So that was back in episode 46, and I still think back to Adonis' Screaming Bear story so often. If you're a creative person, and if you are a creative person who cares about your creation so much that you're listening to a podcast about it, then your creations are something that are a part of you. It needs to be a part of you. It begs to be a part of you. And if you don't allow it to be a part of you, then you're missing out on a complete life. When you have your art and you have your creations as a sidekick to your life, you have this timeline to look back on. Whether it's visual art like Adana, or writing for me, or music, or photography, or sculptures, or whatever, you'll have a trail of evidence. You'll have a timeline of creations that you can look back on that will bring you back to the moment that you created it, like a smell bringing you back to your childhood. That is why art is so powerful. And when we're talking about using your art to tell a story, What better story is there than the story of your life? To not just help you to tell the story of your life, but to act as anchors in your timeline so you can go back through your memories, whether they are happy or sad. Like Adana, use your art as therapy, as a friend, and as a diary. And the really cool thing is that your art is not just a continuous story for you, but you are also a part of the continuous story of art itself. Here's Bobby Chu from episode 138.
Art is the most magical, most amazing thing, the most amazing conversation that we've been having amongst human beings for like millennia, right? Like,
Yeah.
it starts off however it started off, maybe as caveman drawings, maybe as something else, I don't know. But then somebody discovers something like perspective, right? And they join in on the conversation and go, hey, check out perspective. And then people are like, oh, that was really cool. How does that work? And then they teach, they contribute to this conversation of art. And then everybody's like, oh, wow, cool. Hey, check out that new person that just learned what you learned. And now this person's talking about 2-point perspective, 3-point perspective. And you're like, oh, wow, that's really cool. I'm learning from that person now. And so on and so forth. And so anyways, this conversation has been happening for such a long time. This amazing conversation before our ancestors, to be able to contribute to this conversation, to add some more knowledge into this great life lesson or whatever you want to call it. It's an honor. It's a privilege and it's an honor. It's definitely not a time to be selfish. If you're able to contribute in what you've learned so that you can help somebody else advance what they're learning, it'll come back to you. And not just that, I feel like it's our amazing opportunity to become a part of history. And if you think about the things that we've lived through, I don't know how old you are, Youngman, but, I'm in my 30s, almost in my 40s, so I've lived through the birth of the internet, digital painting, CG, all these amazing things. If you have something to contribute, I urge you to contribute it, because what a shame if it isn't passed on. It's almost like you were never here.
Youngman here again. It's almost as if you were never here. Eek. That's a harsh reality, but it very well could be your reality if you don't tell your story. And of course, you'll have lived, but not to your fullest. Not if you don't tell your story. But there's not much I have to say here, because Bobby really effectively illustrated the much larger implication of why you need to tell your story. Be a part of the conversation of human history. You're a part of a much bigger story than just you. It's like one of those giant mosaics. I think there's one, like a famous one with Einstein. I don't know, they make them with computer graphics, but the mosaics that are all just tinier images or tiny pieces of art that all make up this bigger picture. And when it comes to the universal story of art, it's like one of those giant mosaics. And you're a part of it. Your part might be very small, but it still affects so many people around you, and it affects the piece as a whole in ways that you can't see. So contribute your part. Don't have your piece of the mosaic be a blank square. And if at the end of the day you still feel like your story doesn't matter, if you still feel like even if you told your story as honestly as possible, it would still be a blank square in the mosaic of humanity, maybe Amber Ray's conversation with another mentor can bring it full circle for you.
And there was one thing that sort of not like saved me, but there was another person I met, another mentor, and we went on this long walk. And I remember telling him this story. And this was probably a year after. And he said to me, well, he's like, if nothing else, just know that right now you're writing your book because you're living it. And because I hadn't been writing for a while, and that just reminded me that my life experiences are the writing, and how I choose to live my life and how I choose to approach every day. And like, if I choose to do like this bold, crazy thing, like that's something I get to write about. And so I started thinking about like, okay, well, what kind of life do I like want to write about? And that ended up being this like really interesting frame for, it was like, really, what kind of life do I want to be living? But because as a writer, I was able to see it through a writer's lens, then I ended up feeling like I started to write my own story in a way, and in a more intentional, deliberate, and empowered way than I ever had before.
At the end of the day, you have to tell your own story. And if you are not happy with the life that you're living, then get out there and live a better life. Whatever it feels like you're lacking, go and do that thing. Whether it's creative or not, get to that source material. But as you're getting to that source material and you're bettering yourself and getting more life experiences and putting those into your art or your creations, still put in the other stuff, the monotonous stuff, the stuff that you don't think other people will care about, the things that you do desperately care about, but you don't talk about, the things that keep you up at night, the things that you fight with your significant other about, the things that you pray about, the things that you wish for, the things that you wish never happened. Those are things that other people are experiencing during their stories, and they're afraid to talk about too. And they need you to make it a part of your story, especially when it can't be told in words. It can only be told through your creations. It's up to you to share all of that. So keep telling your story and keep telling your truth at all points of your journey. There's never going to be that moment where you have lived your fullest life and now it's time to go back and tell the journey. Tell the journey as you're living it. Tell that mentor to fuck off. Share your screaming bears. Spit out the poem of your life and be a part of this human timeline. But more importantly, be a part of your own timeline and your own story. That's all I've got for you today. Hopefully you were inspired to go and get your creative work done, to go and share your story. Go ahead on this podcast journey, this podcast relay, by checking out Johnny Anomaly's episode, or you can go back in time by checking out the Kicking the Creatives episode, or also the 3-Point Perspective podcast with Jake Parker, Will Terry, and Lee White. We'll have all of those links listed at today's show notes page, yourcreativepush.com/333. I love you all so much. Go and get some amazing work done. Share your story. I can't wait to see it. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.